Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. That time of week again. I know you guys have missed it. It has been a couple of weeks now since before the All-Star break since we did this. Missed last week, was in Vegas on a trip and didn't really have time to pull it off. Thought maybe an extra week wouldn't be so bad, but we're going to jump into it, guys. And it's really been a difficult power rankings. I did a complete wash and kind of reset the whole board as a whole. Bottom row somewhat looks the same, but the top and middling rows are absolutely really difficult to do. If we look back a couple of months ago, we had like 6, 7, maybe 8 teams that were above 600 in the MLB, some of them over 700. Now we're looking at a league of 30 teams, and we only have one team above 600, and I don't remember the last time this late in the MLB season that is happening. So it's been very difficult to do a power rankings, but I'm doing my best, and I'm just going to go through it as we usually do every Sunday, right before the Sunday nighter. Cubs in St. Louis, of course, about to kick things off. Right before I do, please, if you are new, subscribe to the channel. If we hit 1,500 subs by the end of the season, I think that's an achievable goal. I'm going to give away another hat for the season. You guys know I like to do that, so if you haven't had a chance yet, subscribe to the channel. Guys, otherwise, we're going to jump in and could you guess who really is number 30? I don't really think, if you're paying any attention, you can think of anyone else to be in the number 30 spot. They have now dropped 20 games in a row. I don't remember the last time I said that. I feel like if we look back a couple of seasons, we had Arizona and Baltimore battling for these bottom two spots. I think one of them got close to 20 losses in a row. I can't exactly remember if it happened, and it had me looking at whether or not Chicago is going to be in that territory of the worst modern day record of all time. They are in that territory. They're not quite there yet. I think a couple more losses and they will have a percentage that is lower than the worst of all time. I can't remember exactly what it is. They're not sitting at it quite yet, but this losing streak is absolutely crazy. I'm not going to talk too much about it. They got swept by Minnesota. They got swept by the Royals. Not too much else. Number 29. Probably, in my opinion, the weakest team in the NL. They still do manage to pick up a couple wins here and there. They did have a 500 week within their own division. They did even beat 2-1 against the Angels. I guess that's not their own division. And then they do lose the series over the weekend against the Padres. A little bit 500 baseball that I talk about it all the time. Coors just manages to pick up some wins here. It's interesting watching some of these younger guys, some of these new guys making names for themselves. We're going to talk about a couple of teams like that in the future. But Colorado kind of sitting right in that same spot. And 28, kind of the same story. These three teams have been pretty much down here all season long. The one difference for me, Miami has made some trades. Obviously trading off Jazz Chisholm, trading off Arraez earlier in. And so they are building. I think they are building back a little bit better than Colorado. And their rotation, in my opinion, is a little bit stronger. Again, these two teams super close. Another 500 week for them. They went 1-1 against Tampa, 2-2 against Atlanta. So a pretty good series there, and they even shut them out today, which was pretty impressive. Usually they're the team being shut out. Number 27, we do have the LA Angels. They've been pretty much a staple. All four of these teams have been a staple in this bottom row, I think, since April. So it's not a whole lot going on, not a whole lot of changes, and not a whole lot to get excited about. 1-2 against Colorado, 2-1 against the Mets. So we got three teams going 500. It's really hard for teams to make impacts on this board because a lot of teams go 500. This is one of the most close the MLB, I think, has ever been. Number 26, and I think a new low in terms of power rankings as a whole. And my own team, if you're a fan of the channel, of the Toronto Blue Jays, 1-3 against Baltimore. We just saw them get walked off by the New York Yankees, so they lose that series 2-1 as well. And just looking at the roster, it's a lot of guys you haven't seen before. They, of course, sold off a majority of their players at this trade deadline. The only real guy, Vladdy, making an impact on this team, the one guy they hope to lock long-term. They only got one more year of him, and who knows what's going to happen with the Jays. But it's been a disastrous season, and honestly, can they go lower? And I think they do play the Angels coming up, and that would be pretty interesting. Number 25. I have the Oakland A's, and they have made impacts this season as being higher and maybe arguably could be a little bit higher. 1-1 against San Fran, 1-2 against the Dodgers. So against the NL West this week, a losing week. We do see some offensive output from this team once in a while. Brent Rooker definitely having a season to remember for this team. And there are some highlights in their pitching rotation, of course, as well. We do think in reality, they do compete very well against this next row we're going to get into. But when we start looking at more in-depth teams, sure, they can take a win like of a team like the Dodgers. Dodgers, of course, almost won that game on Friday as well. Almost had a big comeback and that almost got swept But the Dodgers are a little bit struggling, and they still can't beat them. So I think the A's pretty much in that spot. Number 24, a team that's had a good season. If you kind of thought they'd be where they are right now, technically, in reality, they could make an argument to make the playoffs. But this week kind of hurt their chances. They did get swept earlier in the week by Arizona, a team where, of course, you want to pick up some wins if you're going to try to get back in this playoff hunt. No one really expects Washington to make that push, I don't think. This is really a building year, but the more meaningful games you can play as you go along is, of course, going to help this team move along in the future. They do win a series this weekend, too, against Milwaukee, again, a playoff team. So they are playing some important games, and they're getting their players some practice going into next year. I think next year with Miami, hopefully Miami's going to be a little bit better. This division very much going to be up for grabs next year. Number 23, they're kicking off their Sunday nighter right now against St. Louis, but so far they have had the series lead 2-1, but they did lose earlier in the week to Cincinnati. So a 500 week so far against their division. This division hasn't been out of reach, but of course you got to go on a little bit of a win streak. Chicago has had that May, June era where it's really, really rough. We did see them in the top-ish rows early in the season because they did have a winning record, and they were kind of putting things together, and people on their roster that they had brought in making big impact, but just kind of fell off, and now they're kind of puttering along in a division where it's pretty much the weakest team is around 500 or slightly lower being them, and a lot up for grabs. And I do have that team that they did lose to earlier in the week, Cincinnati. Cincinnati has been one of those teams that you just can't seem to get any momentum. They have times where they look like they are very capable of competing with playoff teams, and then they go off and lose to a team that's in the bottom row for whatever reason. They'll play good against top teams, they'll play bad against top teams. They'll play good against bottom teams, they'll play bad against... It's just very inconsistent. At the same time, a lot of young guys, a lot of stuff to build around, but I think the depth is definitely lacking in the Cincinnati team. Big win against Chicago. They're in there, but they're just run differential, all that stuff, just not putting it together. And it's a lot of teams to hop if they're going to be in the playoff race. One of those teams is the San Francisco Giants. They did play each other this weekend, and San Francisco got the better of them 2-1. San Francisco also played Oakland earlier in the week, 1 game apiece, so only a 5-game week for San Fran. Not a lot going on. The problem with San Fran is their division. They pretty much have been around 500 all season long, contrary to what their offense has been able to put up and all that fun stuff. But they're just slightly below 500, with the Central being so thick in the 500 area and their division having 3 teams that are much better than them. I just think they are far out for being able to make the playoffs. And this is kind of the area, the second bottom row in theory probably has a shot to go in the playoffs, but you got to win probably 10 in a row at one point or another, really start hopping, because there's just so many teams ahead of you, and we're starting to kind of run out of season left to make. Number 20, another one of those teams kind of fit in that category, and they're playing division this week. They go 0-2 against Cleveland, 1-3 against Kansas City, so 2 teams ahead of them in their division. And you got to win, and Detroit just doesn't have the depth. It's just not coming together for them this season. They're not quite there. They had 3 teams ahead of them, Minnesota, Kansas City, Cleveland, all those teams making giant steps. Kansas City and Cleveland probably making bigger steps than them this season as well. They're going to be looking ahead to next season, but this division is starting to shape up to be potentially quite stacked. The one benefit they've had all season long that puts them in a better spot in wild card races is they've got to beat up on Chicago. I don't know how many they have left, but I know they have a couple. Number 19, I do have the Texas Rangers, and it's just not been the season for the Rangers as much as they haven't just gotten completely destroyed. The injuries haven't completely wiped them out. And for the most part, their division, no one's walked away with it, so it's kept them in the race. But going 1-2 against St. Louis, 1-2 against Boston, you're just not winning series against teams ahead of you. It's not going to help you make it in this race. Texas, running out of runway. I've talked about them all season long, how they've hung around, but we are ready to see them go on a winning streak. If they want to get back in this race, they will have to do it. Number 18, I think they're down quite a few spots, honestly, from when I did this last Power Rankings. The last Power Rankings now must have been 15 plus days ago, so it's almost been half a month, and I think they might have been the farthest falling down, maybe a little bit of coming back down to earth. They do beat Texas. They're 1-2 against Chicago, 500 overall, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm not as excited about this team being able to make a playoff push when we have other teams that are showing a little bit more promise than them. And surprisingly enough, just looking at this team, Tampa Bay Rays, number 17, a team that pretty much was a seller exactly at the deadline. I think could name like at least 5 guys that they traded off over the span leading up to the trade deadline, and yet somehow I think they've won 4 of their last 5 series, something like that. 1-1 against Miami, so you don't really count that, but 2-1 against Houston. I know they beat the Yankees a couple bit ago, and even other teams in there. I can't quite recall off the top of my head, but Tampa just seems to always have pitching shutting down the other team, and it continues to be happening. Somehow they're above 500. Somehow they're in the playoff race per se. I know that American League, you probably need around 550 or better to make it. They're probably going to fall short, but they're definitely doing a lot better than you would expect being at the trade deadline there. 16. I have the Pittsburgh Pirates, 2-1 against Houston, 1-2 against Arizona. Paul Skeens had an amazing outing today, and they just could not hold the fort down to win the series against Arizona, and that makes me think they're just not quite ready to be that playoff contending team. They're a little bit in the middle of the pack, but they don't have the extra depth in the bullpen, in the rotations to really push them over the finish line as well as at the bats. Pittsburgh, they've made some big steps throughout the season. We saw them around here at the beginning. We saw them fall all the way down, and then now they're really starting to show, all right, they're a little bit of a consistent team now. But at the same time, the depth just never carries them quite across the finish line. I don't expect them to really push for the playoffs. They're in there, middle of these teams. We're still talking about teams, in my opinion, that are a little bit out of the playoffs. And now we might start talking about now, 15 up, are the teams that I think are the biggest threats to really start fighting. Number 15, probably one of the biggest surprises over the past few months. 2-1 against Miami, 1-2 against LA Angels. The Mets, you can't lose a series to the Angels. That's really what's holding them back right now, being able to do that. We saw them go on a little bit of a winning run about a month and a half ago. They did when that winning run really catapulted them back up into the playoff conversation. They're, of course, in that wild card race, but it's kind of teetered out and it's been a little bit more 500 as of late. Will they be able to carry it forward? I think they're right there in the middle. It's kind of teetering. Which way are they going to go? It's only time at this point that's really going to tell. Next up, we have the Houston Astros, 1-2 against Pittsburgh, 1-2 against Tampa. Sure, they're a little bit ahead of both those teams right now on the board. I did have them in the top 10 before the All-Star break. A little bit backboard to earth. American League West overall as a whole has fallen down this board quite low. I think they might be overall ranked the lowest out of all the divisions, with the next highest one coming up right about soon. But Houston, it is what it is. It's been one of those seasons that they probably wish they could forget, especially the first couple of months, but they're in it, and they're consistently in it over year. So maybe that experience is going to play it forward. A little bit of concern with this rotation. They've used so many arms, but somehow it's been working out, and they're right there, tied right now, I think, with Seattle, who lost today against Philly. Did win the series against Philly, which is absolutely a big, massive comeback for them, because it has not been going well for them whatsoever. Boston beat them earlier in the week, and before that, it's been a pretty slowly declining ship. They were working their way up to a 600. Now they're almost back to 500. Trade deadline, they were quite active, bringing in some big players, trying to make a big impact, because really this division is up for grabs, with the highest rank being number 13 there. And we got 2 teams in the bottom row. So they should be able to pick up, both these guys, in my opinion, a shot at the wild card. You should be able to pick up some wins in your division that other teams might not in that wild card race. So that's going to make a big impact. But overall, really only one team's guaranteed. And right now, I'm leaning towards Seattle, although it is super close. Number 12, team holding on to that. I think the last wild card spot right now, Kansas City Royals. They have been one of the better teams. I think they're 7-3 over their past 10. 3-0 against the White Sox. 3-1 against Detroit. A 6-1 week, right when you need them. They're starting to show the team they were earlier in the season as well. And guys, if they can keep that up and keep beating up on the teams lower in their division that they get their chance against, and now they have Cleveland and Minnesota, I think they can compete very well against those teams. They're in there in that playoff bubble, and I like what I see out of Kansas City right now. Number 11, after a devastating series loss to the Yankees last week, they had a nice bounce back week, and I'm pretty excited. 2-1 against Seattle, 2-1 against Texas, a West Coast swing for Boston, and I think they were at home though, but it doesn't matter. They got it done, and that's what we'd like to see. This Boston team has surprised, and I think manager of the year is definitely going to be heading that way for Boston. And to see that kind of bounce back, and a team they're about 550. It's not perfect. Like, they got to keep that up because that last spot, this wild card, is probably going to be one of the more competitive. It's been a long time. Number 10. I think the highest we've had them all season long, and just in time. It's like Arizona's doing last year all over again, a little bit under the radar for the first half of the season. Now when it counts, they're starting to pile on. 3-0 against Washington, 2-1 against the Pittsburgh Pirates, a team that I comparatively put them close together, but Arizona, been there, done it, in winning the series when it matters. Come back against Paul Skeens of all teams. They're getting ready for full playoff format, and really with the Dodgers struggling at the top and the Padres been up and down all season long, Arizona is ripe to be able to make a little bit of a run and possibly make a shot at this division. Number 9, I do have that Padres team I was just talking about. 2-0 against the Dodgers, 2-1 against Colorado. They've won probably more the past month, 30 days, than most teams in the MLB. A little bit of concern. I don't know if it's quite there. A little bit shaky against Colorado in this series right now. They've, of course, made some impactful trades that have really helped them as a whole, as a team. And they're a team that maybe this is good, the best time, because they've always been that team that people are expecting them to break out, have a good year. And this seems to be the year that most people aren't talking about them that way, so maybe a little bit out of the spotlight, and it might work out for them. Number 8, I got the Milwaukee Brewers. A little bit of a free fall for these guys. 1-2 against Atlanta, 1-2 against Washington. They've been in the top row for a majority of the season. It's been a little bit of a struggle. I thought they were pretty much guaranteed to win this division, and now that they're starting to work their way down to a 550 win percentage themselves, the rest of the division is starting to heat up, maybe get in there. They're going to have a lot of games against this division, and this division is so tight, they got to make sure they win them. If they continue to win in their division, they'll, of course, walk away with it. But in the grand scheme of the whole MLB, I do think they are falling a little bit behind maybe some of these other teams. But guys, I've talked about it. We only have one team above 600. This is absolutely probably the tightest the top 10, I think, has ever been in the power rankings. Number 7, we have the Atlanta Braves, and I had discounted them out. Acuna injury, rotation injuries. I had started moving them down the board. I think I got them to 10th before they started winning again, and I even predicted back in June that they weren't going to make the playoffs. Now I'm starting to maybe eat my words at that. They seem to be figuring it out, and Atlanta is going on a little bit of a winning ways as of late. 2-1 against Milwaukee, 2-2 against Miami. So this weekend they won the first 2 games against Miami, and then they lose the last 2. I would have loved to see them walk away with the division, but the gap between them and Philly has shrunk immensely because Philly has struggled as of late. Number 6, I think they're in the same spot as they were not too long ago. 1-2 against the Mets, sweeping the White Sox. The Twins have shown that this power of this offense is quite alive and well, starting to all come together. First half of the season completely out all over the place for the Minnesota Twins, but they're starting to be a lot more consistent, especially in the batter's box, which was a big concern early in the season. But the Twins are in there in that hunt, and I've always thought they had a real shot at taking this division, and I am not counting them out yet. Realistically, you could argue the Twins almost anywhere on this board in the top row here, but they're definitely a top row team. Number 5, I've thought about dropping these guys a little bit. I like to see the salvage I like the fight that they had against Oakland this weekend. After barely losing that first game, they came back and won 10-0 on Saturday and then squeaked out a nice win today. Not a great series. It was a 2-game set against the Padres, but for whatever reason, the Dodgers can't figure out the Padres, so hopefully they don't meet up in the playoffs. They were missing Freeman this week. Betts, of course, is getting ready to come back, hopefully real soon for them, and then we can start to see a little bit of what the real Dodgers are all about. Jack Flaherty, a big impact for the Dodgers. I think it's going to make a big difference in this power rankings, and we're going to probably see this as the lowest that we'll go. Number 4, I got the Baltimore Orioles, 3-1 against Toronto, 2-2 against Cleveland. A very busy week for the Baltimore Orioles. The pitching has been one of my biggest concerns, and it seems to be holding true all over the place. But on that same thing, the offense has been delivering, and it's been nice to see some of these young guys finally get Jackson Holiday back up, making an impact for this team. And it's hard because Baltimore has really, really struggled over the past 6 weeks, 4 weeks. If you look at just the past 4 weeks record, they're probably in the second bottom row. It's just been really bad. But at the same time, you got to remember this team is young. They're going to have their ups and downs. And I think overall, watching this team and comparing them against any, I think they can match up and beat any of these teams that we've talked about so far. And realistically, they compete very well against these next 3 teams that we're about to talk about. It was interesting to do a complete wipe of the board and have to put all these teams back up because you kind of forget where they were before a lot of these teams. And I know Orioles have been in the top 3 for a long time. Number 4, I think, is still very good on this board considering how they have done. Number 3 might come as a surprise, but maybe not. This Phillies team has struggled over the past few weeks, having had the best win percentage for a long time, now dipping below 600. Got to be pretty interesting how that went. I know talking about the Phillies for a long time at the beginning of the season, we were always talking about how their easy schedule. And then they started playing some good teams and they were still winning. But now we see them play a harder schedule consistently after week. And this week was a prime example. 0-3 against the Yankees, 1-2 against Seattle on the road. Just a tough back-to-back series, and we're going to see a lot more of that with Philly. And when it comes to playoff time, that's going to be the norm. And right now, Philly has not demonstrated to me that they are ready to compete at that level, and that dropped them to number 3. And that leads us to number 2. I do have the Cleveland Guardians. I did debate them going to number 1, but when I match them up with the number 1 team, I still think there's an edge there. But overall, Cleveland does have the best record in the MLB. They go 2-0 against Detroit, their own division. They're really building that gap. They managed to match up so well against the rest of their division. I think they're pretty much going to go for it. Of course, Minnesota right there, but I think Cleveland has what it takes to close it out. Good week for them. Always good weeks. They were not the 7th team at number 1 for the year yet. We'll give them another week because at number 1, I think this is probably the highest rise on the board since All-Star, and I just had to do it because I like what I've seen out of this team. They've really battled back after what was a struggling couple of months, 6 weeks there in the middle of the summer, and this week was no difference. 3-0 against Philly, a nice 2-1 series win against the Jays. They beat Boston last weekend after losing the first game and really coming back in that series. They add Jazz Chisholm at the trade deadline, which just fits into their lineup so well, just added weapon. I think overall, just looking at that lineup, Aaron Judge, clear MVP. This team is all around, I think, the strongest, and they're starting to demonstrate it. They're starting to ramp up right in time for the playoffs, while we're seeing other teams, these 3 in particular, struggle at this point in the league. Of course, they are 1 serious injury to Judge away. They could be in a lot of trouble, but right now I do consider them the strongest team in the MLB. Let me know what you guys think. Where do you just completely disagree with? What do you agree with? And what did you enjoy this past weekend? Like and subscribe for more, guys, and we will see you for that next video.